Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I've been a lover of sports my entire life, and ever since I was a little kid, all I ever wanted was to be a professional athlete. I was really good in high school and received a scholarship to play football in college as well. I wanted to have a good college football career, but it wasn't close to what it would actually take to get to that next NFL level. I was able to make a little money after college doing commercials for local businesses and autograph signings, but that quickly faded, and I moved on to life after sports. I've had a pretty successful career as a working professional, but my biggest accomplishment and the pride of my life is my family, my beautiful wife, and our amazing daughter. My daughter has taught me how to be a better person, and I love her more than anything else in this world. And I'm sure if some of you reading this are parents, you can relate to those sentiments. About 2 years ago, I was invited back to the small town where I played college football for an event celebrating the completion of their new facilities on campus. They planned to do a tour, a dinner, and, of course, some drinks and snacks in between. They invited alumni, sponsors, and some high-end boosters to bring everyone together to network and, more obviously, to fundraise, as I'm sure the new facilities weren't cheap. I really didn't feel like going, but my daughter seemed interested in taking a trip with me, so I figured we'd go, make a little daddy-daughter date of it, have some fun, and leave early. Once I arrived, though, I wondered if I had made a mistake. The last thing I wanted to do was schmooze with all the boosters and talk about the good old glory days. I prepared myself for having the same conversation about a dozen times, but since I had my daughter with me, I figured most of my attention would be devoted to her, so I wouldn't have to entertain a lot of other conversations, at least for long. There was one person I didn't recognize who seemed to keep giving me a bit of a side eye, looking at me like he was annoyed I was even there. Every time I caught him staring, I would look over in his direction, and he would immediately look away. As I made my way around the room, I felt like this person was kind of shadowing me, always staying a fair distance away. Every time I looked up, I could see him, which I hadn't noticed with anyone else at the event. I was so busy that I eventually shook it off and made sure my daughter was having enough to eat and drink and was having a good time. As soon as she got bored, I was planning to head out of there and just take her home. She really enjoyed our tour of the new facilities and even got to see the mascot and take a picture with it. We got some free swag, which she loved as well. It was worth attending just to see the smile on her face. My daughter and I were sitting at a two-person high-top table when the dean pulled me aside for a conversation. I got up, grabbed my daughter's hand, and told her I'd be right there and was just standing up to talk to a few people. My daughter was still directly to my left, so I could see her while I was having a conversation and shaking hands. The dean introduced me to the new head football coach, and we made some small talk and shared a few laughs. Every few moments, I made sure to look back at my daughter, who was playing with a team-branded fidget spinner. I entertained the conversation for what felt like another 30 to 45 seconds and then said, "Well, I'm going to get back to my daughter and see if she wants to hit up the dessert table with me." As I went to sit back down, I realized my daughter wasn't there. My stomach immediately hit my throat as I rose on my toes to see if I could spot her, or maybe if she was hiding under the table. I saw her walking about 50 feet in front of me down the hallway, exiting the main room, and heading toward the new facilities or the exit. She was too far away for me to see who she was with. It was clear she was with another man. I yelled out to her and beelined through the crowd, pushing past people and shouting her name. It caused quite a commotion, and I could hear people getting quiet to see what was happening. I caught up to her, picked her up, and asked what she was doing and if she was okay, but she was still smiling and as happy as can be. My attention immediately turned to the well-dressed man who was seemingly escorting her somewhere. Seeing his face, I realized this was the same guy who had been staring at me all night. I asked him what the hell he was doing with my daughter and seriously considered knocking his teeth in before he even got a chance to answer. He gave me some weak explanation, and, to be honest, as shocking as it is, I don't remember exactly what he said. I just remember telling him I was calling the cops. Apparently, this guy was a big donor to the school and was known by most of the people there. Before the police arrived, I absolutely ripped into the dean, asking him what type of people they allowed to donate to the school. I don't think I could have done anything more to show my disappointment and outrage, all the while trying to avoid upsetting my daughter. The guy must have slipped out of the room during all the commotion because I didn't see him again. I made sure to talk to the police and ensured that they had all his information. A lot of people at the event knew who he was. I got out of there shortly after and took my daughter for some ice cream, letting her know that nothing was her fault but that, in new places, she should always stay with me and never walk away, especially with people she doesn't know. I don't know what became of the incident. I don't know if any laws were broken or what excuse he actually gave. I assume, and hope, that the matter was taken seriously. Once I got back home, many towns away, I never heard anything more from the authorities or was asked for additional information or statements. Looking back, I'm just glad my daughter was safe and that I was able to step in before anything terrible happened. It just goes to show that no matter how diligent you are, you need to be even more vigilant to protect your children. When I was in high school, I loved basketball, and I was one of those kids from the late 2000s era when ball was life. I knew I wasn't good enough to play at the next level, but it didn't stop me from playing the game I loved. I played with the same group of guys for years, and by the time we were seniors, our team was making a run for the playoffs. It was a very exciting time, and the whole community was buzzing about it. After a massive win, our team was only one win away from a sectional title, which would be the greatest accomplishment I could achieve in high school. The sectional game was 6 days away, and our coach did something a little unorthodox. He set up a scrimmage for us to stay in game shape. For anyone who doesn't know, setting up a scrimmage this close to a big game can be risky. As a coach, you're risking your players' durability and potentially exposing them to unnecessary injury. But as players, we didn't really care. We wanted to play as much as possible. We were riding high on our winning streak, and any chance to improve our game, we wanted it. The main reason our coach set up this scrimmage was to really test our skills and push us to our limits. The team we were set to play was composed of players from all over the state. They didn't belong to one school, these were essentially the best players in the area. It was going to be a test for us. If we could keep up with this team on the court, we'd be ready to compete in the sectional game. The game was on a Thursday evening after school, and we played at a neutral location. The gym was nice, but the surrounding area had seen better days. It was in a sort of rundown part of the city. One drawback of the gym was that it only had one locker room, which the other team used, so my team had to change in the basement, and basketball season is in the winter, so let's just say that the basement was absolutely freezing. Not only was it freezing, but it was also very dark. Even with all the lights on, it felt dim. Something about the basement was just off. It was creepy down there, not just because it was a dark basement. From the moment I got down there, I joked with the team that something felt weird, and most of the guys just laughed it off and called me paranoid, which I'll admit, I am a little paranoid by nature, especially after listening to podcasts like Let's Read. While we were in the locker room before the game, we were all joking around, just being typical high school idiots. I kept telling my teammates that something didn't feel right about this place, and one of my teammates was using his cell phone to shine a light into the dark corners of the room. It just looked like junk and boxes everywhere. This was 2009, so the flashlight on his phone wasn't as powerful as it is today. Eventually, the coach joined us, and once we focused on the game, I forgot all about the creepy basement. After the game, which we lost, by the way, we went back into the locker room to discuss plays and talk about what went right and what went wrong. After our coach gave his final speech, he left the locker room with the other 2 assistant coaches, and my team got dressed while continuing to talk about the game. One by one, players started to filter out of the locker room until it was just me and another player. Just as we were finishing up, we heard a loud crash from the back of the room. It was a loud, jarring sound that caused us both to freeze. As soon as I heard that crash, that horrible feeling about the creepy basement came rushing back. My buddy asked me if we should go investigate. I was completely against it, but I didn't want to look like a coward, so I just went with him. This time, it wasn't just paranoia. As he shined his weak cell phone light into the back corner of the basement, standing as still as a statue was a man. He looked to be in his 30s, very disheveled, and angry looking. My friend and I just stood there, staring at him, and all three of us were completely still. Those few seconds felt like the longest stretch of time I'd ever experienced. Just as my friend tried to say something, the man started to scream. It wasn't even words, it was this weird growl of a scream, and we both decided to run. As we sprinted toward the stairs, the man ran after us, and he was fast enough that he managed to grab my hand and yank me to the ground. Fortunately, he fell to the ground in the process, and with the momentum, I was able to bounce back up quickly and keep running out of the basement, screaming. My friend and I ran into the parking lot, screaming our heads off, where the rest of the team and coaches were waiting. I couldn't speak, but somehow my buddy was able to explain to the coaches what had just happened to us in the basement. One assistant coach stayed outside with us and the rest of the team while calling the police, while the head coach and the other assistant coach ran inside to confront the man. I still have no idea why they did this. In the heat of the moment, they probably felt compelled to defend us. A few minutes passed, and the police showed up and ran into the building. It was the first time I'd ever seen the police spring into action like that. We were all freaking out because the coaches hadn't come back outside. A minute or two after the police went in, the two coaches finally emerged. The assistant coach had his arm around the head coach, who was holding his arm as if it had been injured. From where we stood, we couldn't see exactly what had happened, but it was clear the coach had blood all over the front of his shirt. Not long after the coaches came out, the police escorted the man outside in handcuffs. He wasn't struggling or resisting. In fact, he had this sort of wicked smile on his face, staring blankly ahead. That's where the nightmare ended that night. It wasn't until years later, when I ran into my old coach at a fundraising event, that he finally told me what happened. He said he and the other coach ran into that basement shouting. They thought we'd made it up at first, because they didn't see anyone down there. But as they stood near the stairs, the man jumped out and cut the coach's forearm with some type of switchblade. The coach thought it could have been a box cutter. Right after he got cut, the other coach tackled the man to the ground and detained him until the police arrived. The coach had to get stitches in his arm and undergo all sorts of blood tests because they didn't know if the blade was clean. Thankfully, he was fine. The scariest part of the story was that nobody knew anything about the man. He had no identification, and he was clearly not in his right mind. Unfortunately, the area where I live has always struggled with issues related to drug addiction, and as far as my old coach knows, this man was just another unfortunate soul who had lost his mind on the streets. If it wasn't for my assistant coach, my head coach might not have been alive to tell the story. That's something that still freaks me out to this day. I remember when I was a kid, I would watch and even attend some football games with my dad, and it was something that we bonded over. When he passed away when I was in the 10th grade, I stopped watching football, though. It just didn't appeal to me like it did when I would watch it with my father. A few years ago, I fell in love with the game all over again. Now for some context, I was 27 years old when I started following football again. I would watch the games with one of my best friends and his wife, and Sunday nights became a tradition at his house. Good food, good friends, good times. Falling in love with the game again started to bring back so many fond memories that I had with my dad. I know a lot of people out there may not enjoy sports, especially American football, but sometimes the memories you make can go far beyond the game itself. However, the memories are not always good. And this story that I'm about to tell you happened last year, and instead of a fond memory, I was left with a very lasting nightmare. As I mentioned a moment ago, I got back into football a few years back, but I wasn't able to attend a game until last year. My buddy surprised me on my birthday with tickets to an NFL game, and I was beyond pumped. This was going to be the first game I attended since before 10th grade. My town, unfortunately, doesn't have an NFL team, and the closest stadium is almost 3 hours away. I didn't want to drive all the way home after the game, so I decided to actually book an Airbnb close to the stadium. My friend who got me the ticket was also attending the game with me, and he was bringing his wife as well. They didn't want to stay after the game, so they planned on driving home afterward. This was honestly fine with me. I was actually looking forward to a quiet evening to myself. The game was awesome, other than one minor hiccup toward the end. The score was tied in the fourth quarter, and our team actually had the ball. A crazy series of plays transpired, and as you might expect, the crowd was going insane. So insane that someone actually bumped into me and caused me to spill some of my beer onto the gentleman in front of me, and he wasn't pleased. I apologized, but he continued with this very verbal assault. After a minute or two of getting yelled at, the man went back to watching the game, as did I. Not long after, the game ended, and our team came out victorious. We cheered and celebrated with the rest of the home team fans. I won't say what the team was for my anonymity. That night, I got back to my Airbnb and just kind of hung out and relaxed. I decided to order myself a pizza and just sort of enjoy my little scenic getaway. The place was very cozy and on the outskirts of that town. It wasn't in the middle of nowhere, but it definitely felt kind of secluded. I'm not exactly sure what time I fell asleep, but it was late, after midnight for sure, and at some point during the night, I woke up because I thought I could hear this very strange noise. I sat in bed for a minute, trying to focus. I didn't know if it was just my imagination or if I actually had heard something. A few seconds later, I heard it again and then again right after. This wasn't creaking floorboards or any of the other things that people say when they think you're being paranoid. This was, without a doubt, the sound of something being thrown at the side of the house. Something small, almost like a rock or a pebble. I got out of bed and turned most of the lights on, mainly because I was a little spooked, but also because I didn't know the layout of the house and didn't want to stumble my way through the darkness. I'm a bit clumsy and have a knack for breaking things. I made my way to the window on the other side of the house, where I had heard the sound coming from. I cupped my hands and looked into the darkness, but I didn't see anything, and I was convinced that whatever I had heard was probably nothing. Being the anxious person that I am, I decided to go investigate outside. I understand this may seem like the worst idea in the world, but looking back, I had convinced myself that nothing was out there except maybe some wildlife, and I just wanted to make sure. I spent a few minutes outside, walking around, having a smoke, and I didn't see anything weird or out of the ordinary. I did see a few small rocks on the side of the house where I thought I had heard the sound, but it was a pretty wooded area, and those small rocks could have just been there the entire time. I decided to chalk up this entire ordeal to just my anxiety and nerves from being away from home. Then I froze. Because I had turned a lot of the lights on, I was able to see inside the house from outside. And there, walking through the kitchen, was a person. Someone wearing a hood. I was able to see them through the room, clear as can be, and I immediately took cover behind a tree, ducking down. Thankfully, I had my cell phone with me, and I immediately called 911. While I waited for the cops to show up, I just sort of watched this figure through the windows slowly creeping through the house. He seemed to be opening doors and even checking closets. I had my small duffel bag on a little table in the kitchen, and this person went through my bag. He even grabbed my wallet and went through it a bit but didn't take anything. After a couple of minutes, this person started to move a little faster. He was whipping open doors and looked like he was looking for something. He looked frustrated. He must have heard the police, because as soon as the cop car showed up, he jumped out a window and started to flee into the dark. I came out from behind the tree and flagged down a cop and tried telling him that the intruder had just run, but they were very focused on calming me down in that moment. Finally, the police were able to take my statement, but by that time, this intruder was long gone. To my knowledge, they never caught this person, and nobody knew what he was doing or who he was looking for. The owners of the house were alerted by the authorities, and they claimed they had no idea why anyone would do that. I believed them. I remember telling my buddy the story the next morning, and he believed that it might have actually been that disgruntled fan from the football game, the one I spilled beer on. I think it would be outrageous and borderline improbable for an intruder to have followed me all the way home, but the more I thought about it, this person did fit the profile of that crazy fan. He was even wearing the same color as the team, but that might have been common for the area as well. This all could have easily been a coincidence, but I don't know. It really made me think. It's really scary that sometimes people out there can just do things like this, and we truly will never know why. When I was 18 years old, I went on my first major trip alone without my family. While I wasn't completely alone, I was with my friends Mike and Stan. It was 2013, and we made the journey to a small town on the outskirts of New Jersey for WrestleMania. Let me first say that the three of us are huge wrestling nerds and still text about it to this day, even though we all live in different states. Back in 2013, this was going to be the greatest weekend of our lives. It was like the Super Bowl for wrestling fans, and this event was going to be at MetLife Stadium, where the New York Giants and Jets usually play. The main show was on Sunday, but the entire weekend was filled with special events. The hotel we were staying at offered a free shuttle service anywhere within 10 miles, which was pretty amazing, and we planned to take the shuttle on Saturday into town to do some activities. Stan got the address of one of the venues, and we gave it to the shuttle driver. There was a clear language barrier, but after a little bit of back and forth, we figured out where we needed to go. The man dropped us off, and we got out of the shuttle like three excited idiots. We didn't even look at where he dropped us off. Once all three of us were out of the shuttle, we realized we were clearly not in the right place. We were in what seemed like a rundown, sketchy part of town. Everything looked abandoned, almost condemned. Stan called the hotel and told them we needed a pickup, but the lady on the phone said it was going to be a little while because the shuttle was already on another call. We begged her, saying he had just left less than a minute ago, but she didn't seem to care. Being young, we didn't fight it and just sort of accepted that we were basically stranded in this almost abandoned part of town. We wanted to be mad at Stan for giving the driver the wrong address, but honestly, we didn't know if it was our fault or his. We put the address into the GPS to see where we needed to go, and it was about a 10-minute drive from our current location, so we didn't want to walk it. This was also before Uber was a big thing, so we couldn't just easily call one. Being young and naive teenagers, we decided to walk around this beat-up area. It was scary and unsettling to be in that area, and we saw people living on the streets who were clearly messed up on something. It was scary, but honestly, it was just kind of sad. As we were walking along, Mike noticed that someone had been following us for a few minutes. He said the classic line, "Don't look now, but it looks like someone is kind of tailing us here." Stan didn't care, but Mike and I started to feel a little uneasy. We started to move a little faster and noticed that the person following us was matching our speed. It was obvious now that whoever this person was, they were on our tail. It wasn't long before we broke out into a sprint, and to none of our surprise, this person actually began to run after us. Mike and Stan were both great athletes and were able to create some distance from the guy. I, on the other hand, am a horrible athlete, and the man was closing in on me pretty fast. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to stop and confront the man. That was a horrible mistake. He didn't stop when I did and just barreled into me, knocking me to the ground. While I was down, with no warning or threat, he buried his elbow into my eye with a lot of force. He hit me so hard that everything went black for a second, and while I was down, he grabbed my wallet and ran back the way he came. Mike and Stan ran back to help me up. They called the cops, who showed up but didn't do anything. They told me that this area was very bad, and people get mugged there all the time. They said the likelihood of getting my wallet back was slim to none. I felt defeated and heartbroken and just wanted to get back to the hotel. Stan and Mike were shaken up as well, so we decided to just hang out at the hotel, watch basketball, and try to get excited about the big show on Sunday. They told me not to worry about the wallet until after the show, and then they would help me replace my ID and figure everything out. The cop who took my report was at least kind enough to drive us back to the hotel. I really did try to forget about the mugging, but I couldn't get the guy's face out of my mind. Not to mention, my face felt like it had been smashed with a shovel. That night, all three of us were woken up by a very loud bang. As I jumped out of bed, I saw the single worst thing I could imagine: someone was trying to open our hotel room door. They had the door ajar, but thankfully, I'd latched it, so they couldn't get inside completely. I ran to the door to try to slam it shut, and in the brief moment before I closed it, I saw someone on the other side. I screamed, telling Mike to call the police, and Stan, trying to be a hero, unlocked the door to chase after the intruder. But by the time Stan got into the hallway, all he saw was the door to the stairs slamming shut. While we waited for the cops, we tried to figure out what had just happened, and then it dawned on me. Someone might have stolen my wallet, and inside was a room key, which not only had the hotel name, but also a little piece of paper with our room number on it. The hotel staff moved me and my friends to another part of the hotel, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At one point, I looked out the window and saw a man walking around the parking lot. I called the hotel lobby because, being young and scared, I didn't want to call the police a third time. By the time I got off the phone, the man was gone, and I never saw him again. We did get to the show on Sunday, but I couldn't enjoy it. Every person I saw with a dark coat made me freeze up. When we got home on Monday, Stan and Mike helped me pay for a new ID and even lent me some money until I got back on my feet. Somewhere out there, some guy still has my wallet, and thinking about it now still makes me cringe. I'm just happy I remembered to latch the hotel room door that night. Maybe it wasn't related, maybe it was someone completely different, but in any case, that was probably the worst night of my entire life. I played volleyball all through middle and high school and didn't want to give it up just because high school was over. So I joined an adult league after high school and played whenever I could. When I was 21 years old, I blew out my knee, and I was more devastated by the fact that I couldn't play volleyball for a whole year. By the time I was 22, I realized that I had lost a lot of burst due to my knee injury, so I decided to try one of those over 21 adult leagues. I was never a fan of those leagues, because they seemed more about drinking than playing, but I decided I was ready to start a new chapter of my life. I can honestly say I loved it. It was a weird adjustment at first, but before long, I was all about it. I made so many friends, and that became my life for the next 10 years. Last year was the last time I played, and I think I need to take this year off. This is the first year I'm not playing since I started the 21 and over league. Let me tell you about what happened last year, and you can tell me if you think I'm overreacting. It was the first or second game of the season, and we played a team of 3 girls and a guy. It was a co-ed league. The game started like most games. It was fun, competitive, and had just the right amount of trash talk to keep things interesting. At one point during the game, my teammates set the ball for me, and I attempted to spike it over the net. I was met in the air by the man on the other team, who lightly tapped it back over to my side. The play caught me off guard, and we lost the point. Once it was a dead ball, the man came over to me and told me it was a great attempt and wished me better luck next time. He was handsome, and he flashed his pearly white teeth at me. I laughed, and we joked about it for a few minutes. I felt like we were kind of vibing, but I think he was just a nice guy and I was overthinking things. We finally went our separate ways after the game, and he asked if he could buy me a drink, but I declined. He then invited me and my friends to join his team at the bar to hang out again, but we declined. It wasn't because we were sketched out or anything, this all felt very normal and nice. We were just covered in sand and ready to be done for the night. My friends and I talked in the parking lot for a few minutes, and eventually, we all said our goodbyes. I was standing outside my trunk, putting my bag away and getting ready to leave when I heard someone clear their throat loudly behind me, the type of noise you make when you want to get someone's attention. I turned around, and standing behind me was a small blonde woman. I recognized her right away. She was one of the players from the team we just played. She didn't say anything at first and just kind of stared at me. I asked if I could help her with something, and she continued to just stare at me. I eventually shrugged it off, said, "Whatever," and got into my car and drove off. That was weird. I looked into the mirror once, and the woman was still creepily staring at me. It wasn't objectively scary or anything, but it was very creepy. Later that night, I got a bunch of phone calls from a restricted number. I answered a few times, but it was just breathing on the other end. I also received some DMs on Facebook from a clearly fake profile, calling me some pretty offensive things. I was annoyed, but I just ignored my phone for the rest of the evening. This went on for a few days, but then stopped completely on the fourth day. I figured whoever had a problem with me was over it by then. The next week came, and so did our volleyball game. After the game, we decided to hang out for a little while before calling it a night. Inside the bar, I saw the handsome man from the previous week. He said hi to me, and I simply waved back. That's when I noticed the blonde woman standing behind him, and I started to put some pieces together. He was probably dating that woman, and she was jealous. I didn't want to be a homewrecker, so after my little wave, I just pretended like I didn't see him. The rest of the night, I could feel her staring daggers at me from across the room. It was uncomfortable, and I just wanted to leave, so eventually, I did. Those restricted calls came back that evening, but I just turned off my phone. Nothing happened all week until it was time for volleyball again. The night started like all the others, though I did feel a bit anxious. I didn't want to see that handsome guy again and then be weirdly stalked by this strange blonde woman. I tried to focus on just the game, which was going well. At some point during the game, I heard someone yell, "Watch out," behind me. I turned around and saw a volleyball fly by my head. Before I could see what was happening, that small blonde woman ran up to me with a bottle and smashed it over my head, screaming at the top of her lungs. I felt the bottle crack my head, and I vaguely remember trying to get myself into a fetal position so this woman couldn't cut me with the now broken bottle. It all felt like slow motion, but it was only about 10 seconds. Two of my teammates grabbed the woman and held her down as she tried to hit me again with the broken bottle, which could have done some major damage. She wasn't even saying words, just screaming like a banshee. The cops arrived after they subdued her and arrested her. While I was being looked at by the EMTs, who said I'd probably need stitches, the man came over and apologized for her behavior. He explained that she wasn't his girlfriend and never had been. She was a friend of one of the girls on his team, and she was apparently obsessed with him. He had told her several times that they weren't together, but she kept telling people they were dating. She even made a joint Facebook account for them, even though they had no pictures together. I'm not sure why they kept her on their team, but it was clear her marbles were messed up from the very beginning. I'm lucky I left that altercation with just a minor laceration, because it could have been much worse. Anyway, I'm done with volleyball for now. I don't want to show up at that bar one day and take a shot to the head from a bottle. I hope that woman found the help she needs because, just looking into her eyes, you could tell she was not well. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.